It was a crisp autumn morning when my world began to unravel, though I didn't know it then. The sun filtered through the kitchen window, casting golden streaks across the counter where I sat sipping coffee. My wife, Elena, had already left for work. She always left early these days. She said her boss wanted her in by 7:30 sharp, but something about her excuses felt off. Elena and I had been married for 8 years. We met at a mutual friend's barbecue, where she laughed at all my jokes, even the bad ones, and seemed genuinely interested in everything I had to say. Back then, she was warm, kind, and full of life, or so I thought. Over time, though, she changed. Her laughter became rarer, her smiles more forced. She started coming home later and later, claiming traffic or catching up on emails. I tried not to let it bother me. After all, we both had busy lives. I worked as an architect, designing buildings that would stand long after I was gone. It was fulfilling work, but it kept me occupied. Still, there were moments when I wondered if something deeper was wrong. Like last week, when I called her during lunch and she sounded distracted, almost annoyed. Or the way she avoided eye contact whenever I asked how her day went. But who was I to question her? We were happy, or at least, I believed we were. Until that conversation. It happened at the gym. I ran into Ryan, an old acquaintance from college. He wasn't someone I saw often, just enough to exchange pleasantries with when our paths crossed. As we chatted near the water cooler, he mentioned seeing Elena recently. "Oh yeah," he said casually, wiping sweat from his brow. "I saw your wife leaving that little cafe downtown, the one with the blue awning. She was with some guy." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. "What do you mean, some guy?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Ryan shrugged, oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. "Just a guy." They looked pretty cozy, sitting close together. I didn't think much of it at the time, but now that I'm talking to you, his voice trailed off awkwardly. Cozy? Cozy? My mind raced. Why would Elena be having coffee with another man? Was this why she'd been acting so distant lately? No, I couldn't jump to conclusions. Maybe it was innocent. Maybe it was work-related. But deep down, doubt crept in, gnawing at me like a relentless pest. That night, when Elena came home, I studied her carefully. She breezed past me, dropping her bag on the couch and heading straight for the shower without saying much. Normally, this wouldn't have raised any red flags. But now every action felt suspicious. Every glance, every sigh carried hidden meaning. And so, quietly, methodically, I decided to find out the truth. Not because I wanted to catch her in the act, but because I needed to know if the foundation of our marriage was built on lies. Little did I know, what I uncovered would change everything. The days that followed were agonizing. I couldn't shake the image Ryan had planted in my mind. Elena sitting close to some stranger, laughing over coffee. It replayed in my thoughts like a broken record, each loop amplifying my unease. I tried to focus on work, sketching blueprints and reviewing designs, but my concentration was shot. Every pencil stroke felt mechanical, every decision hollow. At home, Elena carried on as if nothing was wrong. She cooked dinner, asked about my day, and even kissed me goodnight. But something about her demeanor felt rehearsed. Her smiles didn't reach her eyes anymore, and there was an edge to her voice when she spoke. Once, I caught her staring out the window with a distant look, her fingers absently twisting her wedding ring. When she noticed me watching, she quickly turned away, pretending to busy herself with the dishes. I wanted to confront her, to demand answers, but fear held me back. What if Ryan was mistaken? What if this was all just a misunderstanding, and accusing her would only drive us further apart? But then again, what if he wasn't? The uncertainty gnawed at me, leaving me restless and irritable. One evening, while Elena was in the shower, I found myself standing in front of her purse. It sat innocently on the kitchen table, its contents spilling slightly from the open zipper. My heart pounded as I hesitated, torn between guilt and desperation. Finally, I reached inside, pulling out her phone. It was wrong. I knew it was, but I couldn't stop myself. I needed proof, one way or another. Her passcode was her birthday. She'd never changed it, not once in all our years together. As the screen lit up, I felt a pang of shame, but it was quickly drowned out by adrenaline. I opened her messages first, scrolling through endless threads of mundane conversations with friends and coworkers. Nothing seemed out of place. Then I checked her call log, searching for unfamiliar numbers. Again, nothing suspicious. Just as I was about to put the phone back, a notification popped up, a calendar reminder for lunch with Jay. Jay? Who was Jay? My stomach churned as I tapped on the calendar app. There it was, a recurring weekly appointment labeled Lunch with Jay, always scheduled during her lunch break. The cafe downtown came to mind instantly. Was this the same person Ryan had seen her with? Before I could investigate further, I heard the shower turn off. Panic surged through me, and I hastily locked the phone, shoving it back into her purse just as she walked into the room. "Hey," she said, toweling her hair dry. "What are you doing?" Her tone was casual, but her gaze lingered on me longer than usual. Had she noticed something? "Nothing," I replied, forcing a smile. "Just looking for my keys." She raised an eyebrow but didn't press the matter. Instead, she grabbed a glass of water and headed to bed, leaving me alone with my racing thoughts. That night, sleep eluded me. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every interaction we'd had since Ryan's comment. Why hadn't I noticed before? The late nights, the vague excuses, the way she seemed to withdraw emotionally. It all pointed to one horrifying possibility. But I still needed more. One name on a calendar wasn't enough to confirm my worst fears. If I was going to uncover the truth, I'd have to dig deeper and be smarter about it. By morning, I had a plan. The next day, I woke up with a strange sense of purpose. My mind was made up. I would find out who Jay was and what role they played in Elena's life. If she thought I was oblivious, she was wrong. I wasn't going to let her, or anyone, pull the wool over my eyes any longer. I left for work earlier than usual, telling Elena I had an early meeting at the office. In reality, I parked a few blocks away from the cafe Ryan had mentioned. It was small but charming, with its blue awning fluttering gently in the breeze. I positioned myself across the street, pretending to read a newspaper while keeping one eye on the entrance. At first, nothing happened. People came and went, sipping lattes or carrying paper bags filled with pastries. But then, just after noon, I saw her. Elena walked in, dressed casually yet stylishly in jeans and a fitted sweater. She glanced around before heading toward a corner table where someone was already waiting. A man. He stood as she approached, pulling out her chair like some kind of gentleman. From my vantage point, I couldn't see his face clearly, but his body language spoke volumes. They leaned in close as they talked, laughing softly, their heads tilted toward each other like old friends or more. My chest tightened, and I gripped the newspaper so hard it crinkled audibly. Who was he? And why did they look so comfortable together? I stayed there for nearly an hour, watching them interact. At one point, the man reached across the table, briefly touching her hand. Elena didn't pull away. Instead, she smiled. A genuine smile that hadn't graced her lips in months when directed at me. When they finally left, walking side by side down the sidewalk, I followed them discreetly. They stopped at a crosswalk, chatting animatedly, and I managed to catch a glimpse of his face as they turned toward the light. He was younger than me, with sharp features and an air of confidence that made my blood boil. They parted ways at the next block, Elena heading back toward her car while he disappeared into a nearby office building. I memorized the name etched onto the glass doors, Crestwood Marketing. By the time I returned home, I was seething. Every step I took felt heavier, weighed down by betrayal and anger. Elena arrived shortly after, humming softly as she unpacked her things. She seemed completely unfazed, as though she hadn't spent the afternoon cozying up to another man. "Hey," she said brightly, hanging her coat on the rack. "How was your meeting?" "It was fine," I replied curtly, unable to mask the bitterness in my voice. She paused, sensing something was off. "Is everything okay?" "Yeah," I lied, forcing myself to meet her gaze. "Everything's fine." But inside, I was anything but fine. The pieces were starting to fit together, and the picture they formed was ugly. Elena wasn't just having coffee with this guy. She was invested in him. The way she laughed, the way she touched his hand. It wasn't innocent. That night, I barely slept. Images of them together haunted me, fueling my growing resentment. I couldn't confront her yet, not without solid proof, but I vowed to uncover every secret she'd been hiding. And Crestwood Marketing? That was my next stop. The next morning, I woke up with a plan forming in my mind. Crestwood Marketing wasn't just a random office building. It was a lead, a thread I could pull to unravel the truth. If this man worked there, then someone inside must know who he was. All I needed was an excuse to get in and start asking questions. I called in sick to work, a rare move for me, and spent the morning researching the company online. Crestwood Marketing specialized in digital advertising, working with small businesses to boost their online presence. It wasn't exactly groundbreaking information, but it gave me enough context to craft a believable story if anyone asked why I was there. By early afternoon, I found myself standing outside the same glass doors I'd seen Elena's companion walk through the day before. My heart raced as I pushed them open, stepping into a sleek lobby filled with modern furniture and the faint hum of conversation. A receptionist sat behind a polished desk, typing away on her computer. "Hi," I said, approaching her with what I hoped was a friendly smile. "I'm here about the freelance graphic design opportunity you posted last week." Her brow furrowed slightly. "Freelance graphic design? I don't think we've posted anything like that recently." "Oh, really?" I feigned surprise, pulling out my phone. Maybe I got the wrong place. Someone sent me a link. It looked official, though." She glanced at her screen, tapping a few keys. "We do hire freelancers occasionally, but it's usually through referrals." "Did you say someone referred you?" "Yes, actually," I lied smoothly. "A guy named, I hesitated, pretending to scroll through my messages. Jason Cole. Does that name ring a bell?" Recognition flickered across her face. "Oh, Jason. Yeah, he's one of our account managers. Let me check if he's available." My pulse quickened. So his name was Jason Cole. While she made a call, I casually glanced around the room, taking note of the employees milling about. Most were young professionals, chatting animatedly or typing furiously on their laptops. The atmosphere felt lively, almost too perfect, like a glossy magazine spread. Moments later, the receptionist gestured toward a hallway. "He's free right now. You can head back. He's in the second office on the left." "Thanks," I said, forcing another smile as I walked past her. As I approached Jason's office, my stomach churned with equal parts anticipation and dread. What would I say when I saw him? How far was I willing to go to confirm my suspicions? When I stepped inside, Jason looked up from his desk, his expression curious but guarded. He was even more polished up close, wearing a crisp button-down shirt and a confident smirk that made my skin crawl. "You must be the designer," he said, rising to shake my hand. His grip was firm, almost aggressive. "That's right," I replied, keeping my tone light. "Sorry to drop in unannounced. I heard great things about your team and figured I'd introduce myself." "No problem," he said, motioning for me to sit. "What kind of projects are you interested in?" We exchanged pleasantries for a few minutes, but I struggled to focus on the conversation. Every time he spoke, all I could think about was how familiar he seemed. Not because of his voice or mannerisms, but because of the way Elena had smiled at him. Finally, I decided to take a risk. "Actually," I said, leaning forward slightly, "I think we might have crossed paths before. Do you know Elena Carter?" His eyes narrowed for a split second, so briefly I almost missed it. Then he chuckled, shaking his head. "Elena? No, doesn't sound familiar." "Why?" "She works at Sterling and Company," I added, naming the firm where Elena was employed. "I thought maybe you two had met through work." "Nope, sorry," he said, shrugging. "Never heard of her." But I didn't believe him. There was something in his tone, a flicker of hesitation, that told me he was lying. "Well, thanks anyway," I said, standing abruptly. "I'll let you get back to your day." As I left the office, my mind raced. Jason knew Elena. I was sure of it. But why lie about it? And what exactly was their relationship? Whatever it was, I intended to find out. Leaving Crestwood Marketing, I felt a mix of frustration and determination. Jason's denial had only deepened my resolve. If he was willing to lie about knowing Elena, then there was more to their connection than met the eye. But how could I prove it? I spent the rest of the afternoon driving aimlessly, replaying every detail of my encounter with Jason. His polished demeanor, his calculated responses, they all pointed to someone who was hiding something. And that something involved my wife. By evening, I returned home, careful to mask my emotions as Elena greeted me at the door. She seemed cheerful, almost too cheerful, as though she were trying to compensate for something. "How was your day?" she asked, handing me a cup of tea. "Fine," I muttered, avoiding her gaze. "Yours?" "Busy," she replied quickly, turning back to the stove. "We had a big client meeting today." Her words sounded rehearsed, like lines from a script. I wanted to call her out right then and there, to demand answers, but I knew better. Confronting her without proof would only give her a chance to deflect or deny. No, I needed evidence first. Solid, undeniable evidence. That night, as Elena slept beside me, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. My mind raced with possibilities. What if Jason wasn't just a coworker or acquaintance? What if he was something more? A lover, perhaps? The thought made my stomach churn, but I couldn't ignore the signs. The next morning, I decided to dig deeper into Jason's life. Social media seemed like the obvious place to start. Using the name I'd learned, Jason Cole, I searched online and soon found his LinkedIn profile. According to it, he'd been working at Crestwood Marketing for 3 years, specializing in client relations. His profile picture matched the man I'd seen with Elena, confirming my suspicions. But what caught my attention most was his list of connections. Among them was Elena's name. My hands trembled as I clicked on her profile. Sure enough, they were connected, not just professionally, but personally. Their interactions were sparse, but one comment stood out. A birthday wish Jason had left on her wall 2 months ago. It read, "Hope your special day is as amazing as you are." It was innocent enough, but coming from him, it felt loaded. Was this how they communicated? Through casual comments and private messages? I scrolled further, searching for any other clues, when I noticed something strange. Jason had tagged Elena in a photo from a company retreat last summer. In the image, they stood side by side, smiling broadly, their arms brushing against each other. To anyone else, it might have looked platonic, but to me, it screamed intimacy. Anger surged through me, hot and unrelenting. How long had this been going on? Weeks? Months? Years? Determined to uncover more, I expanded my search beyond social media. A quick background check revealed that Jason lived alone in a downtown apartment, a sleek high-rise with floor-to-ceiling windows and panoramic views of the city. It wasn't hard to find his address. People these days rarely guarded such information. Armed with this new knowledge, I formulated a plan. If I couldn't confront Elena directly, maybe I could catch Jason off guard. After all, he didn't know who I was, or so he thought. That evening, after Elena left for another late meeting, I drove to Jason's building. Parking a block away, I waited, watching the entrance from my car. Hours passed, and just as I began to doubt whether he'd show up, a familiar figure emerged. Jason stepped out onto the sidewalk, dressed casually in jeans and a leather jacket. He glanced around before heading toward a nearby bar, disappearing inside. Taking a deep breath, I followed him. The bar was dimly lit, its atmosphere heavy with the scent of whiskey and cigarette smoke. I hesitated at the entrance, my heart pounding as I scanned the room for Jason. It didn't take long to spot him. He was seated at a corner table, nursing a drink while scrolling through his phone. I approached cautiously, my mind racing with what I would say. How do you confront someone who has been secretly entangled in your life? Do you accuse them outright, or do you play it cool, gathering more information before revealing your hand? In the end, I chose the latter. "Mind if I join you?" I asked, forcing a casual smile as I gestured to the empty seat across from him. Jason looked up, surprised but not alarmed. "Sure," he said, shrugging. "Help yourself." I sat down, ordering a beer from the passing waitress. For a moment, we sat in awkward silence, the weight of unspoken truths hanging between us. Finally, I broke the ice. "You work at Crestwood Marketing, right?" I asked, keeping my tone light. He nodded, sipping his drink. "Yeah, account manager. What about you?" I'm a freelancer, I lied smoothly. Graphic design, mostly. I stopped by your office yesterday looking for some potential gigs. Recognition flickered in his eyes. Oh, right. You're the guy who came in asking about Elena. My stomach tightened at the mention of her name, but I kept my expression neutral. That's right. Funny thing, she doesn't seem to remember you. Jason chuckled nervously, shifting in his seat. Yeah, well, we don't really interact much. Just mutual connections, you know? Mutual connections, I echoed, letting the words hang in the air. Funny how small the world is. We exchanged pleasantries for a few more minutes, but I could tell Jason was growing uneasy. His eyes darted around the room, avoiding mine whenever possible. He knew something, I was sure of it, and I wasn't going to let him off the hook so easily. Finally, I leaned forward, lowering my voice. Look, I'll be honest with you. I think there's more to your relationship with Elena than you're letting on, and I want to know what it is. For a split second, panic flashed across his face. Then, just as quickly, he masked it with a smirk. I don't know what you're talking about, man. Like I said, we barely know each other. Really? I challenged, pulling out my phone. I opened the photo of them together from the company retreat and slid it across the table. Then explain this. Jason froze, his eyes widening as he stared at the image. For a moment, he said nothing, his jaw tightening as he processed the situation. Who are you? He demanded, his voice low and tense. That's not important, I replied coldly. What is important is that you've been lying to me and to Elena's husband. His face went pale. You're her husband? I nodded, my gaze unwavering. And now I want answers. Jason's composure crumbled under the weight of my revelation. He slumped back in his chair, running a hand through his hair as though trying to gather his thoughts. Listen, he began, his voice shaky, it's not what you think. Isn't it? I shot back, my anger simmering just beneath the surface. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've been seeing my wife behind my back. No, he protested, shaking his head vehemently. It's not like that. We're just friends. Friends? I interrupted, my voice rising slightly. Friends who meet for coffee every week? Friends who exchange flirty messages and tag each other in photos? Don't insult my intelligence. He sighed, defeated. Okay, fine. Maybe it started out as something more. But it's over now. It has been for months. Over? I repeated, incredulous. Then why were you having lunch with her yesterday? Why did you lie about knowing her? She wanted to keep things quiet, he admitted, his shoulders sagging. She said she needed time to figure things out, to decide what she really wanted. And what exactly did she want? I pressed, my voice laced with bitterness. Jason hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. She talked about leaving you. Said she felt trapped in the marriage, like she'd made a mistake. Each word hit me like a hammer, shattering whatever lingering hope I had left. Trapped? A mistake? Was that how she saw us? But I told her it wasn't fair to string either of us along, Jason continued. I ended things because I couldn't keep living a lie. So noble of you, I spat sarcastically. I'm sorry, he said quietly. I never meant to hurt anyone. Well, congratulations, I snapped, standing abruptly. You succeeded. As I walked away, my mind was a whirlwind of emotions. Anger, betrayal, disbelief. Elena hadn't just cheated on me. She had planned to leave me entirely. And all this time, I had been oblivious, clinging to the illusion of a happy marriage. But the worst part? She hadn't even had the decency to tell me herself. That night, I returned home to find Elena already in bed, feigning sleep. Her breathing was too shallow, too deliberate. She knew I was there, but she didn't acknowledge me. For hours, I sat in the dark, staring at the wall as my thoughts spiraled out of control. Everything I thought I knew about our relationship had been a lie. Every memory, every shared moment. It was tainted now, poisoned by her deceit. By morning, I had reached a decision. When Elena woke up, I was waiting for her in the kitchen. She blinked groggily, startled to see me sitting there with a cup of coffee in hand. We need to talk, I said flatly. Her expression shifted instantly, a flicker of guilt crossing her features. About what? Don't play dumb, I snapped, slamming my fist on the table. I know everything, Elena. About you and Jason. About your little lunches, your cozy chats, your plans to leave me. Her face drained of color. I don't know what you're talking about. Save it, I growled. I confronted him last night. He told me everything. Elena sank into a chair, her hands trembling as she covered her face. Please, let me explain. There's nothing to explain. I cut her off, my voice icy. You betrayed me. You lied to me. And now, you're going to pay for it. Her eyes widened in fear. What are you going to do? I didn't answer. Instead, I stood and walked toward the bedroom, retrieving a folder from my desk. Inside were copies of every piece of evidence I had gathered. Photos, messages, receipts, all proof of her infidelity. This is yours, I said, tossing the folder onto the table. Take it and go. Pack your things and leave. Consider this your final act of freedom. Tears streamed down her face as she stared at the folder, but I felt no pity, only cold resolve. Elena left that afternoon, taking only a suitcase and the folder of evidence. I watched from the window as she drove away, feeling nothing but emptiness. But my revenge wasn't complete. Not yet. Over the next few days, I methodically dismantled her life. I contacted her employer, anonymously tipping them off about her inappropriate relationship with a client, Jason. I sent screenshots of their interactions to mutual friends, ensuring everyone knew the truth. And then, I turned my attention to Jason. Using the same meticulous approach, I exposed his affair to his colleagues, tarnishing his reputation and costing him his job. By the time I was done, both Elena and Jason were pariahs, cut off from the lives they had once taken for granted. It wasn't enough to erase the pain they had caused me, but it was a start. Months passed, and the dust settled. The house felt quieter without Elena, but also lighter, as though a toxic presence had finally been lifted. I threw myself into my work, pouring my energy into projects that would leave a lasting mark on the world. Slowly, I began to rebuild my life, piece by piece. One evening, as I sat on the porch watching the sunset, I realized something important. Elena may have broken my trust, but she hadn't broken me. I was still here, still standing. And though the scars of betrayal would always remain, they were a reminder of my strength, not my weakness. Life goes on, even after the hardest falls. And for the first time in a long time, I believed I might actually be okay.